Recently, in an IGN interview with Remedy Comms director Thomas Pua, the discussion about the Xbox Series S and X and the S's unique hardware components came up, with Thomas offering the following in reply when asked about the differences in the hardware platforms and difficulties that the Alan Wake developers themselves have had with the Xbox Series S compared to the X. And I think this is interesting to discuss. The comment goes like this. The GPU is an issue. It really is. And then having less memory is a pretty big problem. And we often get, okay, you make PC games. Surely you know how to scale. Well, memory is not a problem on the PC. It really isn't. And that's one of the struggles when you talk about resolution and frame rate. It's just not enough to drop the resolution heavily. That's what we're doing on the S, and we're really, really working hard to make sure the visual quality still holds up. He went on to say that every game is different, every developer is different, but you can't have the best of both worlds. You got to choose where you're going to focus. And lastly, it's a lot easier to scale on the PC because of memory. I want to talk about that one in particular. Firstly, the Series S, which is Microsoft's entry-tier next-gen system, has a different setup than just a system that may be slightly less powerful than its brethren. While its almost identical CPU to the Xbox Series X holds up, the Series S GPU power is about 1/3 of the X, and more importantly, the memory that the game system is using is dramatically different. With 16 gigs total with a split into two banks of 10 gigs and 6 gigs respectively on the Series X, and a total of 10 gigs with 8 and 2 splits on the Series S, the sizes are different enough. However, the Series S also runs both of those splits, in some cases, a great deal slower. One of the reasons why we've seen some games handle this incredibly well is simply a combination of game type, how compromises impact the CPU and GPU, and the engine that the game is actually using, as well as development for a lot of these games beginning before or right when the Series S and X were prepped. The reason why we're hearing more of this now, though, is that's changing, especially as PC titles are becoming more advanced, as well as games moving to more advanced versions of engines, and those aimed at higher specs, and the idea that Microsoft is really a multi-platform release solution, whether it be the cloud, the Series S and X, or the PC itself. It's easy to see how the decision was made, though, especially at the time. Tech sometimes inexpertly moves forward in leaps and bounds and in unexpected ways, sometimes driven by popular game engines, a unique setup on new cards and features, an engine's feature set, or even the popularity of a series of games. The S originally may have seemed like a very good idea for cost, especially when going up against a premier competitor, but also on a technological front, because at the time, graphics cards, even as reported by Steam surveys, weren't really moving the needles for the average user, sticking to low-end NVIDIA and AMD cards. But one place where the PCs have always been ahead is pure system RAM. As the Remedy devs discuss, it's the combination of the S's slower GPU and the lack of memory amount combined with that slower speed that it runs at that makes just dropping the resolution less of a performance equalizer than we've seen in other generations prior with light and normal versions of consoles. Originally with games on older engines, and at the starting of the gen, this was just far less of an issue as games weren't pushing the systems near as hard or were built on technology that wasn't requiring specific processes. However, as Remedy has pointed out, Alan Wake is just chock full of special effects, many of which start to chip away at not only the GPU and its fill rates and specific hardware-supported effects, but its available memory, resulting in far deeper cuts into games and their presentations beyond even what low-resolution drops can steal back. While he did make sure to say that he needed to word the response carefully, it was pretty clear, as the comment stated, that the GPU and the RAM were a problem with the Series S. Really stunningly, the majority of Xbox Series owners are S owners. It makes a lot of sense. The low price and capabilities of the system day one, as well as the promise of game content parity between them, means that consumers could leap in at a price point that's incredibly low, though a lot of us always think that somebody's going to jump into the high tier. It's just not necessarily true. However, this seems to be coming back to hurt Microsoft, especially the idea of future viability of cross-compatible games. Also behind the scenes, we're hearing some complaints from developers, and we're seeing some different situations play out. For example, Red Dead Redemption 1 got a 60 FPS patch, which surprisingly has not moved, as of the time of this recording, onto the Xbox platforms. Perhaps unrelated, perhaps related. What we know is related, though, is Baldur's Gate 3. They had to have a special deal with Microsoft to get the lack of Series S local split screen to not result in the game simply not getting released at all on Xbox platforms. And it makes a lot of sense because when you look at a title like that, it's not just the amount of memory itself, it's that you're splitting it across two exact game versions to play it split screen. This is something that I've talked about in other videos, where split screen is already an absolute disaster when it comes to system resources. For example, if you're testing a Halo game and you throw one grenade and you're in a single player game and it hits a group of other 10 grenades, you can look exactly what that's going to require from your CPU, GPU, and your overall memory. But if you have two people playing and they both do the same thing, well, technically now you're looking at double that fill rate. And it is one of the problems we see with split screen local. And it's another reason why even on the more powerful systems, we don't see it as much. While many games won't push the systems nearly hard enough for this to be a problem, and while different developers will have unique ways to get around the issue, as counted out countless times by developers themselves who work on the system, they are, however, regardless of anything else, having to put more work into ports than they did when the gen started. This was an intelligent idea from Xbox to offer the S, or at least an understandable one. Possibly they should have changed around and looked at a different kind of way of delivering this, especially when it came to separating those memories the way they did, and obviously the speed in which they do so. Parity is not intelligent, though, especially if the normally accepted cut in frame rates or resolution we've seen in non-pro systems for the last gen isn't going to be enough to get a game on the S at all in the first place. All platform holders also have developer teams that work with game makers to get titles onto their platforms and help them through problems. We've seen this all the way back to the SNES, the Sega Saturn, everything. But no one's magical. At some point, the unicorn of super low price and next gen is just going to be seen for what it is now, a white horse with a stick taped to its head. Or more importantly and accurately, probably an albatross around the neck of a company that wants to push its hardware, but consistently gets pulled back by one part of it. And that's because Xbox treats the S and X almost like the exact same thing. But the more forward we go, the more this is going to appear like a backward stance. Any company that wants their games on any devices always have hard decisions ahead of them. Microsoft's is even more. They have to split their market into three sections, a Series S, Series X, and cloud-based gaming, trying to cover the entire market. But that market has just so happened to begin to chip away at the very weakness that the actual S has. Depending on their setup prior, if they had chosen different things, this may not be occurring nearly as much. Now, this is a price point decision. If the memory in the Series S wasn't split, or if the speed was the same as the X, developers who are having problems, well, when I talked to them, told me that it would be much easier to work between the two. But you do end up getting what you pay for. With Baldur's Gate 3 and maybe the missing 60 FPS patch for Red Dead paving the way for Microsoft dropping parity, and that's a question that's going to pop up. However, the additional work for all involved to decide when and if that happens is an overhead that many developers may increasingly chafe at, or more likely simply not have the resources to pull from the main design team to perform and optimize. And it's not like we haven't seen some games do incredibly well on the S, especially when taking into account the vast differences. This doesn't mean that's going to stop, but the inevitable slow creep into the future and expectations for games has continued through every generation, from the PS4, PS4 Pro, to the PS5, Xbox, Xbox One X, Series S, and X, as well as any cards, GPUs, and CPUs. That's just how tech works. What's your opinion on this? Drop parity completely? Have Xbox move to a mid-gen refresh and like the Xbox One and PS4 just slowly phase out the low end? Or will they do something like the Switch where they have cloud versions of it that you can play instead of the version on the S, if that's what you want to go for? Pop off in the comments. Check out the reviews for Mirage and Starfield and upcoming Alan Wake. More making of videos are in the playlist as well. If you want to see how open world games are made, I've covered many titles with a lot of developers giving input on those. I would love for you to check them out. Peace out. Gang, gang.